Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Technically Speaking. We still are active, by the way. We've been MIA for the past few weeks.
Yeah, but for good reason, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say we should explain why.
Let's do it. Let's explain.
Okay. You explain.
Yeah, so, we've had a lot of fun creating some of the short form content that we know a lot of you guys are enjoying as well. Thank you for all the likes and comments on it. A lot of it's on LinkedIn. Some of it is going still out on the YouTubes. But we decided to really focus on that and continue to do the podcast, but once a month instead of once a week, and hopefully go a little bit deeper and have a little bit more engaging conversations with our guests and make them sweat a little bit.
Absolutely. And with that, as always, I'm your host, Megan, and we have John here and a special guest. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello.
So just to begin, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Kevin Croxall. I'm 5'7" and a Leo. My name's Kevin Croxall. I'm a data scientist currently working in the healthcare industry. Previously worked as a consultant, and before that was in academics as a researcher in the field of astronomy for about a decade.
Academia, that sounds amazing. If I read your bio on LinkedIn correct, you do have a PhD, correct, in astrophysics?
That is correct. I am a doctor of astrophysics.
I'm wondering, though, just for our audience, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit about the gaseous makeup of near star-forming regions and why that's important to us as humans on Earth. Thank you. Please keep it under 2 minutes. Go.
So the chemical composition of star-forming regions tells us how the universe has evolved and where the elements that we are made up of came from.
What initially sparked your interest to get into the field you are in?
So initially, as I mentioned, I was a research scientist in astronomy for about a decade. And when you go into astronomy, it's a known fact that only about 20% of the people are going to get a job in that field. And so as you go through the steps, you start to think, what else could I do if a job doesn't materialize? And looking at the skills that I had acquired, which were project management, critical thinking, running experiments, designing experiments, programming, communication, all of those fit into the niche of data scientist. And so I began to explore, what that job actually was and what it entailed, and found it to be a really good fit for me.
So you've been with a couple different consulting firms, and now you're with a product company. What are some of the differences between working with consulting versus working for a company building their own product?
So with a consulting firm, you're constantly shifting the types of projects you're working on lots of different, sometimes proofs of concept, sometimes larger implementations, but it's always within a much more defined scope of what the client has asked for. And as you move into a product company, you start to implement within the scope of that company. And so there's simultaneously more direction within a very specific thing that you're building, but also a bit broader sense because you have to fit in across the entire enterprise rather than just the bit of the enterprise that's working with you.
We've been fortunate enough to work together for a couple of different years, a couple of different places. What's the most exciting project you've gotten to work on? You don't have to give client details, but just some of the fun business challenges that you as a data scientist have gotten to help solution and build off.
I don't know. There's been a lot of fun ones, from building conversational agents that can take input from different types of systems. Sometimes they're active conversations going on. Sometimes they are one-sided conversations that you're then interpreting and sending that to a solution. There's been a lot of fun work around logistics and putting things together and knowing when to take a step, and really helping people understand also just in general how to use data and which questions they can expect an answer from and which ones are not good questions.
What would you say are some of the common pitfalls to avoid when presenting data to different audiences?
So there are several things you have to think of when presenting data. Uh, First of all, when you're presenting data, you can't present too much detail or everyone will get lost. At the same time, you can't gloss over important details. So there's a really tricky balancing act there. Now, you also have to present it in a format that the audience will comprehend. So if you're presenting data to any sort of audience and you throw up a giant table filled with numbers, no one's going to connect with that and take away a good message. You have to drive them where you want them to go. And sometimes that can include a table, and then you might highlight the cells or rows that you're specifically addressing. But you have to use it in a sense where you're taking them along with the story that you're telling. You can't just put the data there and let them look at it and interpret it, because they'll interpret it in a myriad of different ways. So in a presentation sense, you have to tell them where you're taking them and then take them on that journey in a story form to help them understand that data.
Oh, thank you for that answer. You definitely, I love the idea of telling stories and making sure that the narrative and the story is there so the end users can have a good comprehension of what is being presented to them. Um, can you kind of, educate us? Clearly, we have our preferences and tools, but from your perspective, what are some of the better business intelligence tools that are available for end users? All the way from you as a data scientist through think about maybe somebody that's a little more on the the business development account management side. Like what's the ecosystem looking like from a tech stack?
Well, the problem with that question is the ecosystem and tech stack are just incredibly large.
Okay,
So
what's your
you have,
preference then? Where are you thinking? What do you like?
well, there's lots of things I like. And it really depends on the task you're trying to accomplish. So you have everything from business intelligence tools like Tableau, uh, or Power BI, Click, all those tools where you can really organize the data, make a pretty chart, make it interactive even, and be able to drill down, which is going to be great for putting together a story, looking at aggregations of data. But you really need to know kind of where you want to drive that question or discussion to. You have to have a sense of the type of thing you want to build. There's all sorts of great, powerful exploratory tools uh, in both AWS and Azure that let you explore the data from a larger basis than something like a Tableau or BI are doing. You're pulling in more, but there you're going to need a little bit more of a programming background to really dig into the data some. Uh, so and when you get into that land, there's so many packages and tools that it becomes, in some sense, overwhelming until you define what the actual problem is. I think in a general sense, one of my favorite tools is, and I think the argument could be made of, is this really a tool? Is just the pandas package in Python, because it really helps pull up data, look at an aggregation, do some quick statistics, slice through and pull out different types of views of that data, see what's there, and then get a sense of where I want to go next. And generally, that where then becomes what's the next tool. But just pulling up the data and being able to look at it is powerful, and so that's where starting with some of those tools, kind of the where my mind goes.
But how would you recommend for people who aren't so familiar with the tools you listed to get assistance or like learn more about them?
Well, I think one of the things I would recommend is to start using them. You know, it might be daunting, but just opening up the tools, going in, seeing what they can do. There's a lot to be said for just kind of trying something, seeing how it works. And that then lets you know maybe it didn't work, and that gives you the question you want to pose. And so then being able to pose that question, whether on your own to someone that knows the tool that you know, whether online or even just going to Stack Overflow and seeing who else might have posed a similar question, then you can really open up the tool that you're trying to get at. But really, the best way to start is just by starting.
Well, what are your thoughts as well? Like, I know a lot of people are starting to use large language models and generative AI as sort of a pair programmer or coding assistant. Is that a new approach, maybe instead of Googling or Stack Overflowing? What are your thoughts? Have you experimented with anything there?
I think those can be a very good way to pair program in a sense, but it depends on how cutting edge you want to be and how established the tools are. So, for instance, Tableau has a great knowledge base online, and my guess is most of these large language models will have that at some level in their training uh, database. So, they're going to give you very good answers to questions such as how do I make a pie chart? How do I make a bar graph? Uh, Even asking, how do I slice data in pandas? That's going to give you a good answer because those are established things. But as you get to more and more niche and very specific things that are going to be not as widely done or maybe exploratory and you're trying something that hasn't been done before, they'll have less knowledge on that. Just as you'll find less people in the world that can help you with those things. But
That's true.
so you really have to look at what level you're asking the question to know if those are going to be useful tools.
What emerging trends in data science are you the most excited about?
Ooh.
Uh, so I think some of the large language models and the generative models are proving to be really exciting. Just the amount of content they're able to generate uh, has always been huge, but the quality of that content in the past couple of years has really increased. And so seeing how those can be leveraged within businesses uh, is a really interesting issue because you then have all the other safety and reasonability constraints you need to consider because you don't want something hallucinating and giving you bad answers. Um, but I think there's a lot of promise there, and it's going to be an interesting space to watch.
And if you really want to watch hallucinations in real time, make sure you join us on What If Wednesdays and all the other short forms where I hallucinate on camera for everyone's enjoyment. Or join the Navy. You kind of did cover, I'm kind of going off on one of Megan's questions here, so I want to make sure I read it right. You talked about multidisciplinary teams and sort of making sure you have the guardrails and everything set. And so working on that. One of the questions we're interested in are what strategies do you use to foster collaboration and ensure that team members from diverse backgrounds are working effectively together? I think it's a great question.
Well, I think the the number one thing is communication, uh, and the number two thing is actually have that team. And I think especially in the when you're talking data and data science, diverse backgrounds in my mind, we often think of it along certain socioeconomic markers, but in terms of data science and data space, having that diverse background also applies to including engineers, developers. your HR personnel, your
Business
product
analyst.
owners, business
Yeah.
analysts. And so you
QA,
need that
everything.
diverse team, not just the data scientist, because again, the data scientist might know how to get a technical answer, how to put together the problem, but they need to have that in conjunction with what the actual problem the product is trying to solve. They need to have the solution in a way that the engineers can fit it into the system with the developers, and that HR or help desk or whoever is going to be able to answer questions about it. So you need that diverse team that can communicate, because where you're going to get into the biggest problem is if your data scientist is speaking a language that no one else understands and no one else is getting what they're saying, then you will not have success. So you have to have all the different partners that can speak to what this is, and get a group effort to put together a successful product.
When starting a new data science project, what are the key steps you take in the design and implementation
So in
phase?
the design phase, I think the very first thing is you have to carefully listen to what you're being asked to create. It's easy to hear a request and just jump to creating a technical solution. But a lot of times that request isn't really getting at the root of what they want. And so you have to listen for when data comes in to when they come out, what are all the things that it needs to address and do, and what the actual root problem that you want to solve is. So that's kind of the first big thing. The second thing is to make sure that you look at your data, whether it's real data in the system or test data. Knowing what's going in and what's coming out is really going to change what you get. And I can think of examples where I've looked at people using systems where they think the data is saying one thing, and so they ask questions related to that. But if you stop and actually look at the data, it's telling you something completely different. And so the question that you were asking doesn't make sense. So taking time to just look at that is that other key step for starting that, how you're going to build the system and design it.
So Kevin, Megan and I talk a lot about how our different perspectives, being Gen X and Gen Z, and kind of how we're approaching. I'm towards the end of my career. She's getting started. I'd love for you to kind of give some Gen X advice to Megan, to the younger audience members watching.
I think the advice is the same as what we might say are just logical advice points for any job or career. Is just take it each day at a time, be curious, ask questions, and just keep working at it. I think one of the in data science, and this is not a generational thing. All generations have people that are going to be curious and people that aren't. And with data science and data in particular, you have to be curious. You have to want to know how to find a solution. You have to want to ask questions about it. Otherwise, you're not going to move the needle, and you're not going to actually get something that is transformational. If you just take a direction from a product owner or from an interested business client, you can deliver what they want. But if you're curious, you can ask questions that they aren't asking. You have the data to get the answers for them, and that can really lead you to transformational changes and watershed moments to improve businesses, products, or whatever you're working with. So ask questions.
All right, Kevin. So we're going to end with my question to end all questions. That's how we end all of our podcasts. We do want you to put on your futurist hat and kind of take a look and make a bold prediction about what either the 5 or next 10 years, something that's going to be transformative in tech. It doesn't have to be just data scientists, but what if you were to say a crazy claim that you believe has a chance to be true from a bold prediction standpoint, what would you like to put out there so in 5 years I can say, haha, you were wrong?
So what I would say is in 5 years' time, the large language models and AI systems, whether it's machine learning, generative, something else, will have transformed how we are working, and we will be scared of something else taking all of our jobs.
Everyone, Kevin will not be back on our podcast, so thank you so much for your one-time visit, Dr. Croxall. We really appreciate you, Kevin, coming and joining us. Kevin's been a friend for many years. Appreciate you taking time out of your very busy day at Availity to hop on our podcast. Any last words? Any thoughts before I finish?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, as usual, thank you all for joining us at home. We can be found all over the podcast world on YouTube, Spotify. I think we're on Apple now. If not, we're going to be there soon. Not on Apple yet. YouTube and Spotify. And if you have any questions, technicallyspeakingexpede@gmail.com. Keep them coming. We love the feedback you guys keep giving us. That's it for today. So thank you all. We'll see you in a month on our next podcast. But don't forget to check out our daily content on all of the channels we talked about at the beginning. That's all I got, everyone. Take care.